It wasn't supposed to happen. Yes, I did it with my only son. I never ever imagined crossing that line, until it happened that very day. The night was quiet, but the silence between us was loud. We were far from home, alone in a hotel room after an event that now feels like a distant memory. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of exhaustion pulling me down, but it wasn't sleep I craved. It was something deeper, something dangerous. He stood by the window, the glow of the city casting shadows across his face. In that moment, he wasn't just my son, he was someone who understood my pain, my loneliness, in a way no one else ever had. The tension between us grew with every passing second. A glance, a touch, a hesitation. The space between us disappeared, and what followed, it's a memory I can't erase. His hand brushed against mine, and before I knew it, we were caught in something neither of us could control. I felt his warmth, the way his body moved closer, the unspoken connection that pulled us into a place we should have never gone. The room spun, the air thick with emotions we didn't dare to name. It was wrong, but in that moment, it felt inevitable. We gave in to a forbidden desire, a fleeting escape from the emptiness we both felt inside. I've kept this a secret for a very long time now. But sometimes, the only way to heal is to confront the darkest parts of yourself. What happened between my son and me was a betrayal of everything I believed in. Yet, here I am, sharing this painful truth, not for sympathy, but to find understanding, maybe even forgiveness. I hope that by telling you my story, I can help others who might be teetering on the edge, lost in their own pain. This is a story of love, loneliness, and the devastating consequences of seeking solace in the wrong place. Our relationship wasn't always this complicated. For most of his life, we had what I thought was a normal, healthy bond. He was my pride, my joy. From his first steps to his first heartbreak, I was there. We shared everything, our thoughts, our fears, our dreams. There was a time when I believed I knew him better than anyone else, and he, in turn, trusted me implicitly. He wasn't just my son, he was my confidant. We would sit for hours, talking about life, the future, and even the little things that made up our days. There was mutual respect, an unspoken understanding that I cherished deeply. It was the kind of relationship most mothers hope for, strong, unwavering, and filled with love. But then, slowly, things began to change. It wasn't one event or moment, it was a series of small, almost imperceptible shifts. My marriage had become a shell of what it once was. The affection, the intimacy, the emotional connection, it had all but disappeared. My husband and I were strangers living under the same roof, locked in a cycle of indifference and silence. I felt invisible, unwanted. The loneliness was suffocating, and I found myself longing for the warmth and care I once knew. It was during this time that my relationship with my son began to evolve. I didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, the way he would listen more intently, the comforting words he offered, the moments he spent ensuring I was okay. He became my anchor in a stormy sea, offering the emotional support I so desperately craved. Unlike my husband, he saw me. He understood my pain, and in those moments, I felt a connection that went beyond the boundaries of a typical mother-son relationship. It was comforting, but it was also dangerous. My son was always sensitive, thoughtful beyond his years. He had a way of reading people, of knowing exactly what they needed without them saying a word. He was gentle, kind, and fiercely protective of those he loved. He had inherited my husband's strength, but it was tempered with a softness that was uniquely his own. In the absence of my husband's affection, my son filled the void. He would ask how my day was, notice when I was feeling down, and make efforts to lift my spirits. It wasn't just about the words he spoke, it was the way he made me feel, cherished, valued, and most importantly, not alone. As days turned into weeks, our bond grew stronger. What started as innocent moments of comfort began to blur into something more complex. I clung to his kindness, his attention, desperate for the affection I had been missing. I didn't see the danger in it, not until it was too late. It was an event I couldn't avoid, a work-related conference in a neighboring city. My husband had no interest in attending, as was the case with most things in our lives by then. My son, always eager to support me, offered to accompany me. I was hesitant at first, but the thought of going alone filled me with dread. Having him there felt like a small comfort, a familiar presence in an unfamiliar place. We left early in the morning, the car ride filled with light conversation and laughter. It felt good to escape, even if just for a while, and to share the experience with someone who genuinely cared. The conference itself was uneventful, presentations, meetings, the usual monotony. But it was the time spent with my son outside of the event that would leave an indelible mark on my soul. After the day's events, we returned to the hotel, exhausted but content. We decided to have dinner at the hotel restaurant, a quiet meal that felt more like a respite from the world than anything else. We talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing effortlessly as it always did with him. Later, we went back to our room. It was a suite with 2 beds, but the space felt intimate, almost too close. We both changed into more comfortable clothes, settling in for a night of relaxation. The TV was on, but neither of us paid much attention to it. Instead, we talked about life, about the past, about dreams we hadn't shared before. There was something in the air that night, an unspoken tension that neither of us acknowledged but both felt deeply. The boundaries between mother and son began to blur, not with words but with the weight of emotions we didn't fully understand. I remember sitting next to him on the couch, the warmth of his presence, the way his hand lingered a second too long when he reached for mine. It happened so naturally, so quietly, that it almost felt like a dream. One moment we were talking, and the next, the space between us disappeared. His eyes met mine, and in that gaze, I saw not just my son, but a man who had become my emotional refuge. The line we had walked for weeks, maybe months, was finally crossed. He leaned in, and I didn't pull away. His lips brushed against mine, tentative at first, as if seeking permission. My heart raced, my mind screaming at me to stop, but my body refused to listen. I kissed him back, the act both shocking and intoxicating. It was as if all the loneliness, all the pain, had found an outlet in that forbidden embrace. We moved to the bed, the world outside fading into oblivion. Every touch, every caress, felt like a release from the chains of isolation that had bound me for so long. I knew it was wrong, but in that moment, I didn't care. All that mattered was the warmth, the closeness, the illusion of being loved. The night passed in a haze of whispered words and stolen moments. By the time the sun rose, reality had begun to creep back in, bringing with it a flood of guilt and regret. But for those few hours, I had allowed myself to forget everything, my marriage, my role as a mother, the consequences of what we had done. I had let myself feel, even if it was for the last time. The morning light crept into the room, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. I woke up to the sound of his breathing, steady and calm, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The memories of the night before flooded back with brutal clarity, the touches, the whispers, the intimacy we had shared. It felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I turned my head to look at him, and for a brief moment, I saw the boy I had raised, the child who had once clung to my hand. But now, there was something else, a man who had crossed an unthinkable boundary with me. The weight of what we had done settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to run, to escape the reality of our actions, but there was nowhere to go. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave, drowning me in shame and self-loathing. How could I have let this happen? How could I have betrayed the most sacred bond of all? I felt dirty, tainted, as if the very essence of who I was had been corrupted. Every fiber of my being screamed in agony, the emotional pain almost too much to bear. Confusion swirled within me. Part of me wanted to believe it had been a mistake, a moment of weakness born out of loneliness and despair. But another part of me knew the truth. We had both made a choice, a conscious decision to cross that line. The love I felt for him had twisted into something dark and forbidden, and now, there was no turning back. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake him, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. When he finally stirred and opened his eyes, there was no immediate recognition of the gravity of our actions. For a brief moment, we simply stared at each other, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. "We need to talk," I finally whispered, my voice trembling. He nodded, his expression unreadable. We both knew there was no easy way to confront what had happened, but we couldn't avoid it either. Sitting across from each other, the distance between us felt both too far and not far enough. I tried to find the right words, but everything I wanted to say sounded hollow and inadequate. "Last night, it shouldn't have happened," I began, my eyes filled with tears. "I know," he replied softly, his voice laced with regret. "But it did. And now we have to figure out where we go from here." We talked for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of the senseless. We both acknowledged the deep emotional voids that had led us to that point, the loneliness that had driven us to seek solace in each other. But no matter how much we tried to rationalize it, the fact remained, we had crossed a line that could never be undone. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my heart breaking with every word. "I don't know how to face this, how to live with what we've done." "We'll figure it out," he said, reaching for my hand. "We have to." But even as he spoke, I could see the fear and uncertainty in his eyes, mirroring my own. As the morning wore on, the weight of our actions settled over us like a dark cloud. We both knew that the road ahead would be fraught with pain, confusion, and the struggle to find some semblance of normalcy. But for now, all we could do was take it one moment at a time, hoping against hope that we could somehow survive the aftermath of our choices. The affair didn't just stay between the walls of that hotel room, it seeped into every aspect of our lives, poisoning the very fabric of our family. At first, we tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but the cracks were impossible to hide. The once easygoing relationship I had with my son was now strained, filled with awkward silences and stolen glances. We both avoided being alone together, fearful of the memories that haunted us. My husband noticed the change almost immediately. He wasn't a man of many words, but he could sense the tension, the distance growing between us. Our already fragile marriage became even more brittle, and the gap between us widened. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the silent questions he never asked but always lingered in the air. Family gatherings became unbearable. I found myself constantly on edge, terrified that someone might see through the facade, might sense the guilt radiating from me. My other children, if they noticed anything, never said a word, but I felt like a stranger in my own home, a woman hiding a dark secret, terrified of the day it would come to light. The weight of what I had done began to take a toll on my mental health. Nights were the worst, sleep became a distant memory as I lay awake, haunted by the events of that night. The guilt was like a constant ache, a shadow that followed me everywhere. I couldn't escape it, couldn't run from the shame that consumed me. Depression set in, a heavy blanket of sorrow that smothered any joy or hope. Anxiety clawed at my mind, making even the simplest tasks feel overwhelming. I became withdrawn, avoiding friends, family, and any situation where I might have to pretend that everything was normal. The guilt was my constant companion, a relentless reminder of my betrayal. I found myself spiraling, questioning everything, my worth, my identity, my very existence. I had betrayed my son, my husband, and myself. The person I saw in the mirror was a stranger, someone I could no longer recognize or forgive. In the midst of my despair, I realized that I couldn't go on like this. I needed to find a way to seek forgiveness, not just from my family, but from myself. It started with my son. One evening, after weeks of avoiding the topic, we finally sat down to talk. The conversation was raw, filled with tears and confessions of regret. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I never wanted this to happen. I've ruined everything." "Mom, we both made mistakes," he said, his eyes filled with pain. "But we have to find a way to move forward. We can't let this destroy us." The hardest part was confronting my husband. Telling him the truth felt like tearing open a wound that would never heal. His reaction was a mix of shock, anger, and deep hurt. "How could you?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "How could you do this to us?" "I don't have an excuse," I admitted, tears streaming down my face. "I was lost, and I made a terrible mistake. But I love you, and I want to find a way to fix this, if you'll let me." The road to reconciliation was long and fraught with challenges. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But we committed to trying, for ourselves, for our family. We sought therapy, both individually and as a couple, working through the layers of betrayal and pain. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's the importance of communication. If only I had spoken up, if only we had sought help sooner, perhaps things could have been different. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar place, feeling lost and unloved, I want to say this: don't wait until it's too late. Speak up, seek help, and don't be afraid to confront the issues in your life. The pain of facing the truth is far less than the pain of living with the consequences of your actions. I'm still bearing the consequences of my shameful actions till today. Do you think I deserve forgiveness?